I never thought I'd be thanking my cheating ex-husband for anything, but his betrayal turned out to be the wake-up call that changed my entire life. 7 months ago, I caught James in our bed with his secretary. Today, I'm signing the papers that give me full control of the $42 million trust fund he never knew existed. Karma doesn't just come back around. Sometimes it brings friends. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. They say hindsight is 20/20, but looking back, I should have seen the warning signs written in neon lights. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, Becca to those who know me, and at 34, I thought I had my life perfectly mapped out. A rising marketing executive at one of Seattle's fastest-growing tech companies, a beautiful condo in Queen Anne with views of the Space Needle, and a husband who I believed was my partner in every sense of the word. James Peterson swept into my life 6 years ago at a charity gala for Seattle Children's Hospital. Tall, with a sharp jawline and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He worked as a financial advisor for high-net-worth clients, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was worth. "You're wearing the wrong investment," he said, eyeing my simple silver bracelet at the bar. It wasn't the most original opening line, but the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled made me forgive the cheesy approach. "And what would you recommend?" Instead, I played along, amused by his boldness. "Something that appreciates over time," he replied, ordering us both another drink. "Like good company." We were married 18 months later in a ceremony overlooking Puget Sound, with 100 guests and promises that seemed unbreakable at the time. My Uncle Richard walked me down the aisle. My parents had died in a car accident when I was in college, and he had stepped in as my guardian, mentor, and biggest supporter. "Remember, Becca," Uncle Richard whispered as we reached the altar. "Real love builds you up. It doesn't drain you." I nodded, too caught up in the moment to realize those words would echo back to me years later with painful clarity. The first 2 years were mostly bliss. We traveled to Bali, bought our condo, advanced in our careers. James's father, Walter, a retired corporate lawyer with a perpetual scowl, never quite warmed to me. During holiday dinners, he would ask pointed questions about my family background, my salary, my career ambitions. James always defended me, but with a lightness that never quite addressed the underlying judgment. "Dad's old school," he'd say, with a shrug. "He just wants to make sure I'm taken care of." It was odd phrasing. James earned twice what I did, but I brushed it off. One of many red flags I chose to color code as something less alarming. Uncle Richard, on the other hand, was my rock. After losing my parents, he became the family I needed. Brilliant, kind, and incredibly successful, he had built cloud-secure solutions from his garage into a cybersecurity powerhouse. He never married or had children of his own, so I became the daughter he never had. We had Sunday brunches at his lakeside home in Medina, where he would tell me stories about my parents and offer gentle advice about life, love, and business. James tolerated these brunches but never seemed to connect with my uncle. "He's a bit intense," James would say on the drive home, always with the business talk and life lessons. It bothered me how dismissive he was of the most important person in my life, but I chalked it up to different personalities. Then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Uncle Richard told me over coffee at his house, reaching across the table to hold my hand as I processed the news. "Don't look so devastated, Becca," he said with surprising calm. "I've had a good run. Built something meaningful. Loved you. What more could a man want?" "How about more time?" I whispered, tears blurring my vision. He squeezed my hand. "We work with what we're given. Now, there are things we need to discuss while I'm still sharp as a tack." James was oddly detached when I broke the news. He went through the motions of sympathy, but I caught him checking email during my tearful evenings. He started working later, missing the family dinners I organized for Uncle Richard's remaining time. When he did attend, he seemed impatient, checking his watch, steering conversations toward investments and the tech industry's future. "Your uncle must have quite the estate plan in place," he mentioned casually one night after a dinner where Uncle Richard had been too weak to eat. "Has he talked to you about it?" The question felt wrong, inappropriate and cold with my uncle still very much alive. But I was too exhausted from grief to confront him. "No, and I don't want to discuss it," I said firmly. It was the truth. Uncle Richard had mentioned paperwork and meetings, but I had put it off, unable to face the finality those discussions represented. Uncle Richard died peacefully in his sleep, 3 months after his diagnosis, with me holding his hand in the hospice center. James was supposed to be there but texted that he was stuck in an important client meeting. I sat alone as the machines were turned off, whispering goodbye to the man who had been my second father. At the funeral, I noticed how James worked the room, shaking hands with tech executives and investors who had come to pay their respects. He seemed energized in a way he hadn't been in months. His father, Walter, stood in the corner, surveying the crowd with calculating eyes, nodding approvingly at his son's networking prowess. "Your uncle was well connected," James commented as we drove home. "I've already got 2 meetings set up with potential clients from the funeral." Silver linings, right? I stared out the window in disbelief. There was a stranger beside me, and I was only beginning to see it. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from Teresa Wong, Uncle Richard's attorney. "We need to discuss your uncle's estate," she said. "Can you come by the office tomorrow?" I expected paperwork, maybe some sentimental items Uncle Richard had wanted me to have. I did not expect to walk out of that sleek downtown office as the sole beneficiary of a $42 million trust fund. "He made his first million investing in tech startups 20 years ago," Teresa explained, sliding documents across her desk. "The majority of the fund comes from an early investment in Mind Matrix before it went public. The rest is a diversified portfolio he's been building for you specifically since you were 19. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. I had no idea. "He was private about his wealth," Teresa said with a small smile, "and very specific about how it should be handled. You'll notice there are conditions." The trust had been structured with remarkable foresight. I would have full control of the funds, but there were provisions to protect the assets from being divided in case of divorce or legal judgments against any spouse. Uncle Richard had even included a letter, sealed in an envelope with strict instructions, that I should read it alone. That night, I sat on our balcony overlooking the twinkling Seattle skyline, the legal documents spread across the table. I hadn't told James yet. Something in me, intuition, self-preservation, or perhaps Uncle Richard's voice in my head, told me to understand everything first. I opened the letter with shaking hands. "Dearest Becca, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Don't waste time mourning me too long. I've had a blessed life, and my greatest joy was watching you grow into the remarkable woman you are." By now, Teresa has explained the trust. I know the amount might shock you. You never cared about money, one of your finest qualities, but money is a tool, and I want you to have the best tools possible for building the life you deserve. Here's what I've learned in my years. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. When people know you have resources, some will see you differently. Some will feel entitled to what you have earned. Some will try to manage or control what isn't theirs. I've watched your marriage with careful eyes, Becca. I've held my tongue out of respect for your choices. But I've structured this trust, as I have for a reason. Trust your instincts. Watch carefully for changed behavior. Remember that you are strong enough to stand on your own. Whatever happens, know that I believe in you. Create something meaningful. Help others. Find joy. That's the real inheritance I hope to leave you. All my love, Richard. I folded the letter, tears streaming down my face. Not just for Uncle Richard, but for the truth I had been avoiding for months. Our marriage had been changing, cooling, shifting beneath my feet while I was distracted by grief and work and the comfortable illusion of partnership. The balcony door slid open, and James stepped out, loosening his tie. His eyes fell immediately to the documents on the table. "Working late?" he asked, reaching for the papers. "It's from Teresa Wong," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Uncle Richard's attorney." James's hand froze mid-air, then continued its trajectory with deliberate casualness. "The will stuff?" Finally. He scanned the first page, and I watched his expression transform. Confusion, disbelief, then a flash of something that looked disturbingly like calculation before he masked it with wide-eyed surprise. $42 million? He whispered, sitting down heavily. That's unbelievable, Becca. Your uncle was sitting on this kind of wealth?" I nodded, watching him closely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "This changes everything," he said, a smile spreading across his face as he reached for my hand. "We need to celebrate. I'll call Martin at the office. He's the best with high net worth portfolio management. We should think about a better property, maybe that lakefront development in Kirkland. And we could finally start our family in style." He kept talking, plans spilling out of him like water from a broken dam. Investments, properties, connections, status symbols. Not once did he mention Uncle Richard, my loss, or how I might feel about this sudden change. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I was seeing my husband, truly seeing him, for the first time. "I think we should take some time," I interrupted his flow of ideas. "Process everything before making any decisions." He blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "Sure, of course," he recovered quickly. "It's a lot to take in, but we should at least move the money into our joint account until we decide. Better interest rates, and my bank has excellent security features." "The money stays in the trust," I said firmly. "That's how Uncle Richard wanted it managed." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "That's for legal protection, Becca. It doesn't mean we can't access it. We're married. What's yours is mine, right?" "Wrong, according to the trust documents." But I simply said, "Let's talk about it tomorrow. I'm exhausted." That night, I lay awake beside James, listening to his rhythmic breathing and wondering how I had missed so much. In the dark quiet of our bedroom, Uncle Richard's words echoed in my mind. "Money doesn't change people, it reveals them." I was about to discover just how true those words were. Part 2. The Awakening. The change in James wasn't gradual, it was immediate and startling, like a mask dropping to reveal what had been underneath all along. The morning after learning about the trust fund, I woke to the smell of coffee and found James in the kitchen, dressed impeccably in his best suit, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, sliding a plate of perfectly arranged avocado toast toward me. My favorite that he had never bothered to make before. "I thought we could have a nice breakfast together before work." I sat cautiously, watching him flutter around the kitchen with newfound energy. "Special occasion?" "Just appreciating my amazing wife," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was thinking about what you said last night, about taking time to process everything. You're right, of course." I took a bite of toast, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "But," he continued, sitting across from me, "we should at least meet with my father. He has extensive experience with trusts and estate planning. He could review the documents, make sure everything is properly set up for us." There it was, the real agenda. Teresa Wong is one of the best trust attorneys in Washington, I replied. I think she has it covered. James waved dismissively. Dad has connections she doesn't. This is life-changing money, Becca. We need to make sure it's managed properly. I'm not comfortable sharing the details with your father yet, I said firmly. His pleasant expression flickered. We're talking about our future here, our family's security. And I'm talking about my uncle's. Final wishes, I countered. I need time, James. He conceded with obvious reluctance. But over the next week, the campaign intensified. James came home with brochures for luxury properties. He mentioned friends at exclusive country clubs who could get us membership without the usual waiting. Period. He left investment books on my nightstand, and he kept finding ways to bring up his father's expertise. Meanwhile, I noticed other changes. James started coming home earlier. He complimented my appearance, he suggested date nights and weekend getaways. After months of emotional distance during Uncle Richard's illness, the sudden attention felt jarring rather than welcome. 10 days after discovering the trust, I came home to find Walter sitting in our living room, James pouring him a scotch. Becca, James called too brightly. Look who stopped by. Perfect timing. Dad was just saying he'd love to have dinner. With us. I set down my bag slowly, anger building. This was no coincidence. James mentioned your uncle's generous bequest, Walter said without preamble. Quite extraordinary. I'd be happy to look over the paperwork for you. Thank you, but that won't be necessary, I replied evenly. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. Don't be hasty. These matters can be complex. There might be tax implications or investment opportunities you're overlooking. The trust has professional management, I said. Teresa Wong has everything under control. Wong? Walter scoffed. She's competent enough for basic estate planning, but this is different territory. This is serious wealth management. I looked between Walter and James, seeing the same entitled expression mirrored on both faces. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't up for discussion. The tension in the room was palpable. Walter set down his glass with deliberate precision. James tells me the trust has some unusual restrictions, marriage provisions. That sounds potentially problematic. Only if someone is planning to divorce me for my money, I replied with a pointed look. James laughed nervously. No one's talking about divorce, Becca. Dad's just looking out for our interests. My interests or yours? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Walter left shortly afterward, his disapproval radiating through a stiff goodbye. As the door closed behind him, James's pleasant facade cracked. What was that? He demanded. You embarrassed me in front of my father. You ambushed me, I countered. You invited your father to discuss my inheritance without even asking me. Our inheritance, he corrected sharply. We're married. Remember? Or does that suddenly not matter now that you've hit the jackpot? I stared at him, searching for any trace of the man I thought I had married. This isn't about the money, James. It's about respect, about boundaries. He scoffed. It's absolutely about the money. $42 million that you're suddenly treating like it's yours alone. Because it is mine, I said quietly. The trust was created for me, with specific provisions that it remains separate from marital assets. His face darkened. So your precious uncle didn't trust me, and now you're following his lead. He was protecting me, I replied, the realization settling in my chest. And maybe he saw something I missed. James stormed out, slamming the door behind him. He didn't come home that night. The next morning, I called my friend Olivia and asked to meet for coffee at our favorite spot near Pike Place Market. I needed perspective from someone who knew me before James, someone whose judgment I trusted. Olivia listened without interruption as I poured out everything. The trust, James's reaction, Walter's intrusion, my growing doubts about my marriage. I'm not surprised, she said finally, stirring her latte. About James, I mean. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? She hesitated. You were so in love, Becca. I didn't want to be that friend. But James has always been calculating. The way he talks about people based on what they can do for him, the networking that never stops, the constant upgrading of his life. Why didn't you say something? I asked, hurt despite knowing it wasn't her fault. Would you have listened? She asked gently. Besides, he seemed to make you happy. But lately, even before your uncle died, you've seemed less yourself. Like you're constantly managing his moods, walking on eggshells. Her words hit with uncomfortable accuracy. I had been making myself smaller, adjusting my behavior to keep peace, rationalizing his growing distance. What should I do? I whispered. That depends, she said. Do you think this is a rough patch you can work through? Or is this who he really is, finally showing through? I didn't have an answer yet, but events that afternoon would remove any lingering doubt. I decided to leave work early, hoping to have time alone in the condo to think. As I turned my key in the lock, I heard James's voice from inside. Strange, since he should have been at the office. It's ridiculous, he was saying, his tone frustrated. The money's just sitting there, and she's being completely unreasonable about it. I froze, hand on the doorknob. You need to be strategic, came Walter's voice in response. If you push too hard, she'll get suspicious. These trust provisions are concerning, but there are ways around them. Like what? James asked. Get her to invest in something jointly. Real estate in both names. A business venture. Once the money moves from the trust into a joint asset, it becomes marital property. In a divorce, you'd have claim to half. My blood ran cold. Divorce is a last resort, James said. I'd rather convince her to see reason. This could set us up for life, Dad. No more kissing up to clients, no more 60-hour weeks. Have you looked at the trust documents yourself? Walter asked. Not yet. She keeps them locked in her home office, but I'm working on it. I backed away from the door silently, mind racing. I walked quickly to the elevator, then out of the foyer building, finding a bench in the small park across the street. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Teresa Wong. I need to meet with you, I said when she answered. Today, if possible. I have concerns about the security of the trust. Teresa cleared her schedule for a late afternoon appointment. By the time I sat across from her in her downtown office, I had replayed the conversation between James and Walter a dozen times in my head, each repetition confirming what I had heard. I believe my husband is planning to try to access the trust funds without my consent, I said bluntly, possibly as a prelude to divorce proceedings where he would claim a portion. If Teresa was shocked, she didn't show it. I'm sorry to hear that, but not entirely surprised. It's why your uncle structured the trust as he did. He knew, I realized aloud. He suspected James might react this way. Teresa nodded. Richard was an excellent judge of character. He didn't explicitly say he distrusted your husband, but he was adamant about creating ironclad protections. How secure is it? I asked. James mentioned joint investments converting trust assets to marital property. That would only happen if you voluntarily moved money from the trust into joint names, Teresa explained. The trust itself is completely protected. But that doesn't mean your husband won't try other methods. We spent the next hour developing a protection plan. I would change all passwords to my accounts and create new email addresses for trust communication. Teresa would add additional verification steps for any significant trust transactions. I would secure all trust documents in a safe deposit box rather than keeping them at home. And, Becca, Teresa added as our meeting concluded, you might want to consider where you'll live if you decide to separate. These situations can escalate quickly. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. The reality of what was happening. What had been happening beneath the surface of my marriage was finally impossible to ignore. When I returned to the condo that evening, James was waiting, concern painted across his features. "Where have you been?" he asked. "I tried calling you." "I turned my phone off during a meeting," I replied, hanging up my coat with deliberate calm. "I didn't realize I needed to check in." He stepped closer, touching my arm. I was worried. After our fight last night, I just wanted to make sure we're okay. I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. Handsome, familiar, and suddenly so transparent. "Are we?" I asked. He blinked, momentarily thrown by my directness. "Of course we are. We're just adjusting to a new situation. It's normal to have different perspectives." "Different perspectives," I repeated. "Is that what we have?" "What else would it be?" he asked, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. I could have confronted him then, thrown his conversation, with Walter in his face, demanded honesty at last. But something held me back. Self-preservation, perhaps, or the need to understand just how far he would go. "Nothing," I said with a smile that felt foreign on my face. "Just tired. It's been an overwhelming few weeks." Relief washed over his features. "I understand. Why don't I order dinner? We can open some wine, relax tonight." "That sounds perfect," I lied. As James busied himself with takeout menus, I slipped into the guest bathroom and texted Olivia. "You were right. Need to talk tomorrow." Then I flushed the toilet and washed my hands, preparing for an evening of pretense while my mind worked on an exit plan. The wife James had married, trusting, accommodating, blind to his true nature, was gone. In her place stood a woman with 42 million reasons to be very, very careful about what happened next. Uncle Richard's words echoed in my mind as I rejoined James in the kitchen. Money doesn't change people, it reveals them. And what had been revealed could never be unseen. Living a double life is exhausting. For the next 3 weeks, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy with James while methodically preparing for whatever might come next. Each morning, I'd kiss him goodbye as he left for work, then immediately begin my real activities for the day. I took a leave of absence from my job, citing grief and family matters, which gave me the freedom to meet with Teresa, secure my finances, and gather information without James's knowledge. The first thing I did was rent a small, furnished apartment in Belltown under an LLC Teresa helped me establish. I didn't move in, not yet, but having a safe space ready gave me a sense of control I desperately needed. Next, I opened new bank accounts at a different institution and transferred my personal savings. The trust remained untouched and secure, but I needed to ensure my day-to-day finances were protected if things escalated suddenly. I also hired Marcus Daniels, a financial consultant Teresa recommended, who specialized in high-net-worth clients going through divorce. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst," he advised during our first meeting in Teresa's office. "Based on what you've told me about your husband's behavior, I think we should assume he'll try to claim a significant portion of both your regular assets and potentially the trust." "But the trust is protected, right?" I asked, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightening. "The trust itself is solid," Marcus confirmed, "but your uncle was wise to be concerned. I've seen cases where spouses gained access through joint ventures, pressuring the beneficiary to withdraw funds or even identity theft." The word sent a chill through me. Identity theft? You think James would go that far? Marcus and Teresa exchanged glances. "In high-value situations like this, people can surprise you," Teresa said gently, "especially when they feel entitled to the assets." They recommended I install a small safe in the apartment for important documents, change all my passwords using a complex generator, enable 2-factor authentication on everything, and freeze my credit to prevent any new accounts from being opened. In my name. I followed their advice meticulously, feeling like I was preparing for war rather than the potential end of a marriage. At home, I began quietly documenting James's behavior. I kept a detailed journal of our conversations about the trust, his increasing focus on accessing the money, and the subtle ways he tried to manipulate me. I installed a small recording device in my home office after finding evidence someone had been searching through my desk drawers. The papers slightly out of order, a drawer not fully closed. While James was at work, I carefully searched his office space in our condo. Hidden in the back of his desk drawer, I found a legal pad with notes in his handwriting. Trust provisions, spousal access, and joint property conversion options. There was also a list of expensive properties in Seattle and the East Side, complete with price points that would have been impossible on our combined salaries but easily affordable with my inheritance. Most disturbing was a handwritten timeline. May, property acquisition; June, company investment; July, portfolio restructure. My stomach churned as I realized he had our entire financial future mapped out, all centered around my uncle's money. I photographed everything and put it back exactly as I found it, then sent the images to Teresa. "Evidence gathering," she texted back. "Smart move. Keep everything." Meanwhile, James grew increasingly attentive in ways that felt calculated rather than loving. He brought home flowers twice a week. He suggested weekend trips to Portland and Vancouver. He attempted to rekindle our physical relationship with unexpected intensity. I went through the motions, hating myself for the deception but knowing I needed time to secure my position. "We should visit that new development in Madison Park this weekend," he suggested over dinner one evening. "I heard they're selling out. Fast. But I can get us a private showing." "Madison Park?" I asked, feigning ignorance though I'd seen it on his list of properties. "Waterfront condos," he said, eyes lighting up. "Incredible views, private dock access, perfect for entertaining. We could use some of the trust for the down payment, keep our current place as an investment property." I pushed the food around, on my plate. "I'm not ready to make any big financial decisions yet, James. It's only been a few weeks since Uncle Richard passed." His smile tightened. "I know you're still grieving, Becca, but life goes on. Your uncle would want you to enjoy what he left you. We could make a small withdrawal from the trust, just for the down payment. The property will only appreciate." "The trust isn't set up for withdrawals like that," I said carefully. "There's a process, investment guidelines." James set down his fork with barely controlled frustration. "This is exactly why we need to meet with Dad. These trusts always have flexibility. You just need to know how to work with them. Your uncle wasn't a financial expert, and frankly, neither are you." The condescension in his tone made something snap inside me. Actually, Uncle Richard was brilliant with money. That's how he built a $42 million fortune that you knew nothing about. And while I may not be an expert, I respect his wishes enough to follow the structure he created. James stared at me, momentarily speechless. I'd never pushed back so directly before. "I'm trying to help us build a future here," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "But you're acting like you don't trust me with your precious inheritance." I met his gaze steadily. "Maybe I'm just being cautious. Like you said, it's a lot of money." A flash of something dark crossed his features before he smoothed it away with a practiced smile. "Of course. I just hate seeing opportunities pass us by. But we have time." We finished dinner in strained silence, and I excused myself early, claiming a headache. As I lay in bed alone, I realized two things with crystal clarity. James would never stop trying to access the trust, and our marriage was already over in every way that mattered. The only question remaining was how to extricate myself safely. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a text message sent to my phone by mistake. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was meeting with Olivia at the Pike Place Market Cafe, showing her photographs of the apartment I'd rented as a safety measure. You really think it'll come to that? She asked, concern etched on her face. I hope not, I sighed. But James has become so focused on the money, it's like living with a stranger. He checks my browser history, asks about every call. I receive. Last night I caught him trying to unlock my phone while I was in the shower. Olivia reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Whatever you need, I'm here. Spare bedroom, getaway driver, alibi, name it. I smiled gratefully, about to respond when my phone buzzed with a text. Glancing down, I saw it was from James, but clearly not meant for me. She's still being stubborn about the tow. Tried property angle, but no go. Need to change tactics. Dinner tomorrow to discuss. V says hi. My blood ran cold. James had obviously intended the message for Walter, but missent it to me. Becca? Olivia's voice seemed far away. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I handed her my phone wordlessly. Her eyes widened as she read the message. Who's V? She asked. I have no idea, I whispered. But whoever they are, they're in on this tactic to get my money. I stared at the message, mind racing. Within seconds, another text arrived. Ignore previous text. Wrong number. Then, immediately after, hey babe, just confirming our dinner reservation. For tonight, 7 p.m. at Canlis. Love you. He's covering, Olivia said. That first text was definitely not meant for you. I nodded slowly, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. I need to find out who V is. Later that afternoon, I called James's office, under the guise of sending him documents that needed his signature. Hi, this is Rebecca Peterson, James's wife, I said when his assistant answered. James asked me to drop off some financial papers he needs today, but I can't remember if I'm supposed to leave them with you or with Vanessa. Vanessa Clark, the assistant supplied helpfully. She's one of our client relations specialists, but she's actually out today, doctor's appointment. I can take the documents if you bring them by. I thanked her and hung up, my mind connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. Vanessa Clark, V. I'd met her briefly at a company holiday. Party last year. Young, stunning, ambitious. James had introduced her as a new hire with tremendous potential. I opened my laptop and searched her name on social media. Her Instagram was private, but LinkedIn showed her profile. 27 years old, former model, now working at James's firm for just over a year. Her profile photo showed a confident smile and perfect features framed by sleek dark hair. I hesitated only briefly before texting Olivia. Need a favor. Can you try to connect with Vanessa Clark on social media? I need to see her recent posts, but her accounts are private. Olivia had connections throughout Seattle's social scene. If anyone could gain access quickly, it would be her. Sure enough, within an hour she called me. You need to come over, now. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on Olivia's couch as she pulled up Vanessa's Instagram feed on her tablet. I didn't have to friend her, Olivia explained. My cousin Jen works at the same firm and already follows her. I borrowed Jen's phone to look. I scrolled through the photos, typical lifestyle content of a young professional in Seattle. Waterfront. Happy hours, hiking at Mount Rainier, brunch plates at trendy restaurants. Then I stopped on a post from 3 weeks ago, shortly after Uncle Richard's funeral. The caption read, "When life gives you unexpected blessings. New beginnings. Secret for now." The photo showed a positive pregnancy test. This doesn't necessarily mean anything, Olivia said gently. It could be coincidence. I kept scrolling, looking for more evidence one way or the other. A week later, another post. A selfie of Vanessa in profile, hand resting lightly on her still flat stomach. The caption, "Our little secret growing every day. Can't wait to start our new life." 3 weeks. Baby on board. The timing aligned perfectly. She would have been in her first trimester when Uncle Richard died. when James began staying late at the office and growing distant. But it still wasn't definitive proof. Then I saw it. A comment on her most recent photo, posted just yesterday. "You're glowing. James is a lucky man." The comment had been deleted, but not before someone had replied to it with a simple heart emoji. I felt like I'd been punched. James wasn't just after my money. He was having an affair with his young colleague, who was now pregnant with his child. "I'm so sorry, Becca," Olivia whispered, putting an arm around my shoulders. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the tidal wave of pain to hit me. But strangely, what I felt instead was clarity, pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. The late nights, the emotional distance during Uncle Richard's illness, the sudden renewed interest in our marriage after learning about the trust. "He wants the money for them," I said flatly, "for his new family." "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked. I stood up, a strange calm settling over me. Exactly what Uncle Richard prepared me for. That night, I returned home and performed, perhaps the best acting of my life. I greeted James with a kiss, asked about his day, and suggested we open a bottle of wine. As we sat on the balcony, glasses in hand, I leaned forward with practiced enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, "about the Madison Park property." His eyes lit up instantly. "Really? I thought you weren't interested." I shrugged, offering a shy smile. "I realized you were right. Uncle Richard would want me to enjoy the inheritance, not just sit on it. Maybe we could look at those condos this weekend?" The transformation in James was immediate and revolting. His entire body relaxed, his smile turned genuine, and he reached for my hand with newfound affection. "That's fantastic, Becca. I think you'll love them once you see them. The view alone is worth the price." "I'm sure," I said, squeezing his hand. "And you're right that we should think about the future, about family." Something flickered in his eyes, alarm, guilt, calculation. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Family?" he repeated carefully. "You mean children?" I nodded. "I'm not getting any younger. And after losing Uncle Richard, I've been thinking about legacy, about what really matters." James set down his wine glass, his expression unreadable. "I didn't realize you were thinking about kids. You've always been so focused on your career." "People change," I said, watching him closely. "Priorities shift. Don't you want children?" He hesitated just a fraction too long. "Of course, eventually, when the time is right." I smiled and changed the subject, but inside, his hesitation confirmed everything. The time was already right for James, just not with me. The next morning, I told James I had a doctor's appointment and would meet him at the real estate showing in Madison Park. Instead, I went straight to Teresa's office, where Marcus and a private investigator named Keith were waiting. "We need to move fast," I said without preamble. "James is having an affair with a woman at his office named Vanessa Clark. She's pregnant, and I believe they're planning a future together. One, financed by my inheritance." Keith nodded, making notes. "This helps focus our investigation. We can establish a pattern of deception that will strengthen your position." "I've already started documenting everything," I said, pulling out my phone to show them the misdirected text and the social media evidence Olivia had found. "This is good," Teresa said, reviewing the material, "but we need more concrete proof of the affair and their financial motivations. Keith, how quickly can you get surveillance in place?" "I can start today," he replied. "Standard package: photos, location tracking, communication monitoring where legal. If they're seeing each other regularly, we'll have solid evidence within a week." I took a deep breath. "Do it. And I want to know about any financial discussions they have." James mentioned a dinner with V to discuss tactics for getting my money. I need to know what they're planning. We should also secure your living situation, Marcus advised. If he discovers you're investigating him, things could escalate quickly. I nodded. I've prepared for that. The Belltown apartment is ready, whenever I need it. Consider moving essential items there gradually, Teresa suggested. Nothing obvious, just things you'd need for a few weeks if you had to leave suddenly. That afternoon, I went through with the real estate showing as planned. James was effusive, pointing out features of the luxury condo with the enthusiasm of someone who already saw himself living there. I played along, asking appropriate questions and expressing manufactured excitement. The closing costs would be substantial, the real estate agent explained. But with the right financing, this could be an incredible investment. We have the financing part covered, James interjected smoothly. My wife recently came into a significant inheritance. I felt my smile freeze on my face. He was already treating my uncle's money as his own, announcing it to strangers as if he had any right to it. That's private, James, I said, keeping my tone light but firm. He looked momentarily taken aback, then laughed it off. Sorry, just excited about the possibilities. That evening, James announced he had a late client meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. I simply nodded, knowing Keith's team would be following him, documenting wherever he actually went. As soon as he left, I began methodically moving items to the Belltown apartment. Important documents, irreplaceable family photos, a few changes of clothes, toiletries. Nothing he would immediately notice missing, but enough that I wouldn't be starting from scratch if I needed to leave quickly. I also took the opportunity to search our condo more thoroughly. In the back of his closet, I found a shoebox containing a small velvet jewelry box. Inside was an elegant sapphire pendant that I had never seen before. Certainly not a gift for me. The receipt was still tucked in the box. $3,200 from a high-end jeweler downtown, purchased just last week. I photographed everything and put it back exactly as I found it, then continued searching. Under a stack of sweaters on his closet shelf, I discovered a manila envelope containing printouts of baby name websites, a brochure for a luxury birthing center, and, most tellingly, a floor plan for a house in Kirkland with notes in James's handwriting about nursery placement and office space. He wasn't just having an affair. He was actively planning a new life with Vanessa and their child, a life he expected my inheritance to fund. I was still processing this discovery when my phone buzzed with a text from Keith. Target at Maximilian Restaurant in Pike Place Market, with female 27, matches Clark description. Seated in private corner booth, conducting surveillance now. My heart pounded as I replied, keep me updated with anything significant. An hour later, my phone buzzed again with a series of photos. James and Vanessa at dinner, holding hands across the table. James kissing her. And most damning of all, James placing his hand on her slightly rounded belly with an expression of tenderness I hadn't seen from him in years. It should have hurt more than it did, but all I felt was cold determination. This man, this stranger, wearing my husband's face, had been living a double life while plotting to use me for financial gain. The last lingering doubts about my course of action evaporated. Keith's final message of the night came just after 11 p.m. Targets now at Clark's apartment. Peterson's vehicle still parked outside. We'll maintain surveillance and report in morning. I slept in the guest room that night, unable to bear the thought of sharing a bed with James when he eventually returned. But morning came, and he hadn't come home. Instead, he texted that he'd fallen asleep at the office after his client meeting ran late and decided to just stay there. Another lie to add to the growing pile. That day, I met again with Teresa, Marcus, and Keith to review the surveillance evidence and finalize my strategy. The photos were irrefutable. James and Vanessa were clearly involved in a romantic relationship, and she was visibly pregnant. We have enough to proceed with divorce filings citing infidelity, Teresa confirmed. The question is timing and approach. Do you want to confront him first or have him served with papers? I considered the options. What gives me the strongest position for protecting the trust and my other assets? Serving him without warning, Marcus advised. The element of surprise prevents him from hiding assets or creating false narratives. We document everything, secure your finances, and present him with a fait accompli. But, Teresa added, that approach might escalate hostilities. If you're still living together when he's served, it could create an unsafe situation. I thought about James's increasing desperation to access the trust, his secret meetings with Vanessa, his elaborate lies. The man I had married was gone, if he had ever truly existed at all. I'll move to the Belltown apartment this weekend while he's at his firm's golf tournament, I decided. Once I'm settled, serve him with papers at his office on Monday. I don't want to give him any opportunity to manipulate or pressure me face to face. That's a solid plan, Teresa agreed. We'll prepare everything for Monday morning. Keith cleared his throat. There's one more thing you should know. During their dinner last night, they discussed finances extensively. We couldn't record the conversation legally, but our lip-reading expert reviewed the footage. They mentioned your name and the trust multiple times. The phrases joint investment, property transfer, and after the wedding were clearly identifiable. I blinked. After the wedding? They're planning to get married? Keith nodded grimly. Based on what we could gather, they're waiting until they've secured some portion of your trust funds before he files for divorce. The pregnancy has accelerated their timeline, but they're concerned about losing access to your inheritance if they move too quickly. A cold fury swept through me. They weren't just betraying me, they were strategizing about it, calculating the optimal moment to discard me while extracting maximum financial benefit. Change of plans, I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. I'm not waiting until Monday. Prepare the papers immediately. I want him served tomorrow, at his office in front of his colleagues, and I'm moving out tonight. Teresa raised an eyebrow. That's aggressive. Are you sure? Absolutely. They've been planning their future at my expense. It's time they understood who they're dealing with. That night, while James was supposedly working late, but actually at Vanessa's apartment according to Keith's surveillance, I executed my exit plan. Olivia and her brother helped me move my remaining essential belongings to the Belltown apartment. I left most of the furniture and household items. They were just things, and freedom was worth more than any possession. I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter. I know about Vanessa and the baby. Don't try to contact me except through my attorney. Teresa Wong's details are attached. Then I blocked James's number on my phone, deactivated all location sharing, and walked out of the condo for the last time. The Belltown apartment felt simultaneously strange and peaceful, a blank slate unmarked by lies and betrayal. I stood, at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the twinkling lights of Elliott Bay, and felt something unexpected. Relief. Tomorrow would bring legal battles, confrontation, and undoubtedly more manipulation attempts from James. But tonight, I was free. Free from pretending. Free from doubting my own perceptions. Free from the suffocating weight of a marriage built on calculation rather than love. Uncle Richard had prepared me for this moment, not just financially, but by showing me what genuine care looked like, by believing in my strength even when I doubted it myself. I pulled out my phone and texted Olivia. I'm out. Safe in new place. It's done. Her reply came instantly. So proud of you. Wine and pizza tomorrow to celebrate? I smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. Absolutely. First day of the rest of my life. As I prepared for bed in my new space, I thought about James receiving the divorce papers tomorrow, realizing his carefully crafted plans were collapsing. He thought he was the one in control, the clever manipulator playing a long game. He had no idea what was coming. James Peterson was about to learn a hard lesson. Never underestimate a woman with 42 million reasons to protect herself. I slept surprisingly well that first night in my new apartment, the sleep of someone who had finally stopped running from the truth. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long rectangles of light across the hardwood floors. For a moment, I simply lay in bed, taking in the silence. No James preparing for work in the bathroom, no pretense of normalcy, no walking on eggshells. Just peace and the quiet certainty that I had made the right decision. My phone buzzed on. The nightstand. A text from Teresa. Papers ready. Process server confirmed for 10:30 a.m. at James's office. Are you still certain about this approach? I typed back without hesitation. Absolutely. Proceed as planned. A second message arrived. From Keith. Target returned to your condo at 6:45 a.m., currently inside. Do you want continued surveillance? I considered this. James would soon discover I was gone, along with my note. His reaction would tell us something about his state of mind and potential next moves. Yes, I replied. Please monitor and report any significant activity, especially if he contacts Vanessa or Walter. With those arrangements confirmed, I made coffee in my new kitchen and sat by the window, watching ferries cross Elliott Bay in the morning light. Today, James's carefully constructed facade would shatter. Today, he would learn that I was neither a fool nor a pushover. For the first time since Uncle Richard's death, I felt a sense of power returning, not from anger or vengeance, but from reclaiming control of my own life. My phone buzzed again at 8:47 a.m., Keith again. Target appears agitated, left condo in a hurry after approximately 20 minutes inside, has attempted to call your number 17 times in the past hour, now en route to his office. So he had found my note. Good. I spent the morning organizing my new space and preparing for the next phase of this ordeal. Teresa had warned me that divorce proceedings could take months, especially if James contested the terms. Given his desperate interest in my inheritance and his relationship with Vanessa, he would almost certainly fight for every dollar he could claim. At 10:42 a.m., Teresa called. It's done, she said without preamble. James was served the papers in the middle of a client meeting. According to our process server, he turned deathly pale and had to excuse himself. I exhaled slowly. How long before he contacts you? Given his personality type and what's at stake, I'd be surprised if he doesn't call within the hour. We're prepared for whatever approach he takes. She was right. At 11:17 a.m., Teresa texted, James Peterson just called our office, requested immediate meeting, scheduled for 2 p.m. today. We'll update you after. In the meantime, Keith's team continued their surveillance. At 11:30, he reported that James had left his office abruptly and was heading toward Vanessa's workplace. 20 minutes later, Target and Clark now at coffee shop near her office. Heated discussion. She appears upset. Photos incoming. Thigh? Images arrived moments later. James gesturing emphatically, Vanessa wiping tears, both looking stressed. They were experiencing the collapse of their carefully laid plans in real time. I felt a strange detachment watching their panic unfold, like observing characters in a film rather than people who had deeply wounded me. My phone began ringing just after noon. Walter Peterson. I declined the call but noted it as evidence of James involving his father immediately. Over the next hour, Walter called 4 more times, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails. Rebecca, this is Walter Peterson. Call me back immediately. Rebecca, you're making a serious mistake. We need to discuss this like adults. You can't just walk away from a marriage without trying to work things out. This behavior is unacceptable. If you think you're going to take my son to the cleaners, you're sorely mistaken. I know excellent divorce attorneys who will ensure you don't get a penny more than you deserve. I forwarded each message to Teresa without listening to them. Twice. His escalating tone would only help my case. At 1:45 p.m., I received an update from Keith. Target and Clark separating. He's heading to Wong Law offices. Clark returned to work visibly distressed. I tried to imagine what James might be feeling as he approached Teresa's office. Anger? Fear? Perhaps even genuine grief for the relationship he had destroyed. Whatever. His emotional state, I knew one thing with certainty. His primary concern would be financial. He would attempt every possible approach to maintain access to what he viewed as his rightful share of my inheritance. Teresa called me at 3:20 p.m. "Well, that was quite a performance," she said, sounding both annoyed and amused. "Your husband cycled through every emotional appeal in the book." "Tell me everything," I said, settling onto my couch. "He started with shock and hurt, claimed he had no idea you were unhappy, that you'd blindsided him. When I mentioned the evidence of his affair with Ms. Clark, he pivoted to remorse, admitted the relationship, but called it a terrible mistake that didn't reflect his true feelings for you." I snorted. "Let me guess. He wants to reconcile?" "Precisely. He claims he's willing to end things with Vanessa, attend counseling, whatever it takes to save your marriage." "And the baby?" I asked. Teresa's voice hardened. "He says it's complicated, and he was planning to tell you when the time was right. When I pressed him on why he purchased a house floor plan with nursery notes, he became flustered and changed." "Tactics. Financial threats?" "Oh, yes. He claimed entitlement to half of everything, including portions of the trust that he argued had been commingled with marital assets. When I explained the trust's ironclad protection against exactly this scenario, he became quite aggressive, stated that you had expressed clear intentions to use the trust for joint investments, specifically the Madison Park property." I closed my eyes briefly. "Let me guess. He has no written evidence of these intentions." "None whatsoever." When I explained the burden of proof would be on him, he shifted again, this time to thinly veiled threats about making the process as painful as possible, unless you agreed to a reasonable settlement. "Which means what exactly?" "He wants $1 million cash, continued residence in the condo for 1 year, and joint ownership of your vacation property in the San Juan Islands." I laughed without humor. "The property Uncle Richard left." "Me that James has visited exactly twice in 3 years? The same property he called too isolated and a waste of prime real estate." "The very same. He now apparently considers it a special place with deep emotional significance to your relationship." "And if I refuse these reasonable terms?" Teresa's voice took on an edge of professional satisfaction. "I informed him that given the evidence of his infidelity, his documented attempts to access your protected assets through deception, and the existence of a prenuptial agreement that he seems to have forgotten about, his position is extraordinarily weak." I sat up straighter. His reaction? Complete deflation, followed by a final desperate attempt. He asked if you would speak with him directly, just 10 minutes to explain everything. I declined on your behalf, reminding him that all communication should go through counsel. I breathed a sigh of relief. Teresa had handled the confrontation perfectly, maintaining professional composure while making our position crystal clear. "What happens next?" I asked. "He'll consult his own attorney, likely his father's recommendation. They'll review the evidence, the prenup, and the trust provisions. Any competent lawyer will advise him that contesting this divorce would be costly and ultimately futile. My prediction? He'll make some noise, file some aggressive motions to try to rattle you, then ultimately settle for whatever crumbs we're willing to offer." "And if his attorney isn't competent?" Teresa chuckled. "Then we're in for some unnecessary billable hours, but the outcome remains the same. Rebecca, your uncle created an airtight trust. You have documented evidence of..." infidelity, and financial manipulation, and you've acted strategically at every step. James has virtually no leverage. After the call ended, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Relief that the confrontation had gone as expected, validation that James had behaved exactly as predicted, but also a hollow sadness for the years wasted on someone who had seen me primarily as a means to an end. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Becca, please, this isn't what you think. I made mistakes, but I love you. Just talk to me. 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Jay." I blocked the number without replying and forwarded the message. To Teresa, James would need to learn that his charm and manipulation no longer worked on me. Keith called an hour later with more updates. Peterson met with his father at a bar downtown after leaving Ms. Wong's office. They appeared to be having an intense strategy discussion. Later, he attempted to return to your condo but couldn't enter. "It appears you changed the locks?" Teresa. "Arranged it this morning," I confirmed. "Security measures." "Good move." He stood outside for about 20 minutes making calls. Eventually, a locksmith arrived, but the building manager intervened. "Your name is still on the lease, but the..." Manager refused to allow forced entry without proper authorization. I made a mental note to send the building manager a thank you gift. Where did James go after that? Back to his father's residence in Laurelhurst. He's been there for the past 2 hours. We're maintaining surveillance. That night, alone. In my new apartment, I felt the emotional weight of the day finally catch up with me. I wasn't mourning James. At least, not the real James, who had revealed himself to be calculating and deceitful. I was mourning the person I thought I had married, the life I had believed we were building together, the future that had evaporated. Like morning fog. I allowed myself 1 glass of wine and precisely 30 minutes of tears before pulling myself together. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Uncle Richard had given me not just financial security, but the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. The next morning brought a flurry of updates. Teresa called to inform me that James had retained Bradford Collins, an aggressive divorce attorney known for representing high-profile clients. He's expensive and theatrical, Teresa explained, but his actual track record is mixed at best. This suggests James is going for intimidation rather than legal substance. Will it work? I asked. It might, if we were less prepared or had a weaker case. As it stands, Collins can file motions and make demands, but he can't change the fundamental facts. Those facts became even clearer later that day, when Keith's team delivered their most damning evidence yet. Emails between James and Vanessa dating back 9 months, discussing their relationship and, more recently, explicitly plotting to access my inheritance. One exchange from just after Uncle Richard's funeral was particularly revealing. James, the old man finally kicked it. Becca's destroyed, of course, but she'll inherit everything, could be substantial. We need to be smart about this. Vanessa, how much are we talking, and how do we get our hands on it? James, not sure yet, but Richardson was loaded. Once I know the numbers, we'll figure out the approach. Patience, baby. Play the long game with me. Another email, sent just days after I learned about the trust. James, 42 million. I nearly fell out of my chair when she told me. This changes everything. Can access 20 plus easily if we're strategic. Start looking at properties in the 3 to 5 range. Dreams are about to become reality. And most recently, after Vanessa revealed her pregnancy, Vanessa, we need to accelerate the timeline. I'm showing already. People at work are starting to ask questions. James, agreed, but we have to be careful. If Becca suspects anything, before we secure the Madison Park property, we lose everything. Dad's working on the trust angle. 2 more weeks, max. I read each message with a strange sense of detachment, as if they were discussing characters in a film rather than plotting to steal my inheritance. The naked calculation, the complete absence of remorse or consideration for me as a human being. Rather than an obstacle, it was breathtaking in its callousness. I forwarded everything to Teresa, who responded immediately. This is exactly what we needed. They've documented their conspiracy in their own words. Collins's position just went from weak to untenable. Sure enough, later that afternoon, Teresa called with news. Bradford Collins has requested a meeting to discuss settlement options. The email evidence appears to have had the desired effect. What are they offering? James will agree to an expedited, uncontested divorce with a complete waiver of any claim to the trust or other assets acquired during the marriage. In exchange, he wants a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from sharing the emails or discussing his relationship with Vanessa publicly. I considered this. He's worried about his professional reputation. Precisely. The emails reveal not just infidelity, but a conspiracy to defraud. If these became public, his career in financial advising would be effectively over. What's your recommendation? Teresa was quiet for a moment. From a purely legal perspective, this offer gives you everything we want with minimal hassle. The NDA wouldn't prevent disclosure if required by law, so if they attempted any further action against you, the evidence could still be used in court. But, I prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. But settling quickly means James faces minimal consequences for his actions. The question is whether that matters to you more than your own peace and clean break. It was a fair question. Part of me wanted James to suffer, to face public humiliation comparable to the private betrayal he had inflicted on me. But another part, the stronger part, simply wanted to be free. I'll agree to the NDA with conditions, I decided. First, James covers all legal expenses related to the divorce. Second, he relinquishes any claim to the condo and its contents. Don't want to fight over furniture or deal with him during property division. Third, he must stay away from the San Juan Islands property permanently, not just during the divorce proceedings. Those terms are reasonable and achievable, Teresa. Confirmed. I'll present them to Collins tomorrow morning. That evening, a sense of anticipation settled over me. Not excitement exactly, but the feeling of standing on a threshold, preparing to step into a new phase of life. I walked the waterfront near my apartment, watching the sunset paint Elliott Bay in shades of orange and pink. For the first time since Uncle Richard's diagnosis, I felt like I could breathe fully. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Wine and celebration still on for tomorrow? You sound better already. I smiled and replied, definitely. Settlement in progress. Freedom within reach. The next day moved with surprising speed. Teresa called mid-morning to report that Collins had accepted our counterterms with minimal pushback. By afternoon, preliminary paperwork was being drawn up. The wheels of justice can move glacially slow, but when both parties suddenly have reason to expedite matters, bureaucratic obstacles seem to melt away. We can file for an expedited hearing due to the special circumstances, Teresa explained. With Collins's cooperation and the right judge, this could be finalized within weeks rather than months. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. So it's really happening. It is. And Rebecca, you should be proud of how you've handled this. Many people in your position would have been paralyzed by the emotional trauma or acted rashly out of anger. You've been strategic, measured, and ultimately effective. Her praise meant more than she knew. In a situation designed to make me feel powerless and foolish, I had reclaimed agency over my own life. That afternoon, Keith reported an interesting development. James had moved his belongings to a hotel rather than staying at his father's house or with Vanessa. He appears to be keeping his distance from Clark for now, Keith noted. Possibly on legal advice to maintain separation during divorce proceedings. I wondered how Vanessa felt about this development, being kept at arm's length by the man who had promised her a luxurious new life financed by my money. Was she beginning to see what I had finally recognized? That James Peterson viewed relationships as transactions, people as means to ends? The thought sparked an unexpected idea. I called Teresa. The NDA we're discussing, would it prevent me from speaking to Vanessa directly? Teresa considered this carefully. The current language focuses on public disclosure and legal proceedings. A private conversation wouldn't violate those terms, provided you didn't share the emails directly. Why? What are you thinking? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But she's carrying James's child, planning a future with him based on promises that can't be kept. Part of me feels she deserves to know exactly who she's dealing with. Tread carefully, Teresa warned. Any contact could be misinterpreted or used against you. If you decide to proceed, I'd recommend waiting until after the divorce is finalized. I agreed to wait, though the thought lingered. Vanessa had participated willingly in James's deception, but I wondered how much of her involvement stemmed from his manipulation. The power dynamic between a senior financial advisor and his young secretary, the promise of wealth and security for their child, James had proven himself adept at identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities. The following week passed in a blur of paperwork, legal consultations, and practical matters of separation. I officially notified my workplace that I would be returning from leave, giving me a renewed sense of purpose beyond the divorce proceedings. I began making the Belltown apartment truly mine, replacing generic furniture with pieces that reflected my taste rather than compromises made with James. Throughout this process, James maintained a surprising silence. After his initial flurry of calls and texts, he seemed to accept that direct communication was futile. Perhaps Collins had advised him that further attempts would only strengthen my case. Or perhaps he had simply moved on to focusing on damage control in other areas of his life. Keith's surveillance revealed that James had been called into multiple meetings with senior partners at his firm. Body language suggests these aren't friendly chats, Keith reported. He's emerging looking increasingly stressed. Possibility that his professional standing is already suffering. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at this news. James had built his career on projected trustworthiness and financial acumen. The irony that his personal financial scheming might be his professional undoing was not lost on me. 16 days after being served divorce papers, James agreed to a formal settlement through our respective attorneys. The terms were exactly as we had proposed: full separation of assets with no claims against the trust, the condo transferred solely to my name, all legal expenses covered by him, and a mutual non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific details of our separation. Teresa called with the news, her voice containing a note of triumph she typically kept well masked. Collins practically tripped over himself accepting the final terms. Apparently, James's firm has launched an internal investigation into his relationship with Clark and potential ethical violations. He needs this divorce finalized before any professional disciplinary proceedings begin. So his career is in jeopardy regardless of our agreement? It appears so. The NDA prevents you from actively sharing information, but it doesn't stop others who may have witnessed inappropriate behavior from coming forward. The firm likely has strict policies about relationships between senior advisors and support staff, particularly when undisclosed. I felt an unexpected pang of something like pity, not for James specifically, but for the wreckage left in the wake of his choices. A marriage destroyed, a career threatened, the mother of his child left in an uncertain position. All because he couldn't see past his own entitlement and greed. When will it be official? I asked. We have a hearing scheduled for next Tuesday. Given the uncontested nature and complete agreement on terms, the judge should approve everything on the spot. By Tuesday afternoon, you'll legally be Rebecca Mitchell again, free and clear. I exhaled slowly, letting the reality sink in. Thank you, Teresa, for everything. You did the hard part, she replied. I just provided the legal framework for your courage. After hanging up, I walked to the windows of my apartment, looking out at the Seattle skyline as evening approached. The Space Needle was lit up against the darkening sky, ferries crisscrossed the bay, and life continued its steady rhythm below. I placed my palm against the cool glass, feeling simultaneously small within this vast city and powerfully, completely myself. Uncle Richard's voice seemed to echo in my mind. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. The inheritance had indeed revealed James, stripping away his careful facade to expose the calculation beneath. But it had revealed something in me too, a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a clarity about what I truly valued, a capacity to act decisively in my own defense. I turned from the window and picked up my phone, scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in weeks. It rang 3 times before she answered. Becca? The voice was tentative, worried. Hi, Olivia. The divorce settlement is confirmed. Hearing is Tuesday. I took a deep breath. I think it's time for more than just wine and pizza. I want to really celebrate. New beginnings, lessons learned, freedom reclaimed. Can you help me plan something? Her voice immediately brightened. Absolutely. Something big or intimate? I considered this. Small but meaningful. Just the people who stood by me through all of this. You, Teresa, maybe a few others who never lost faith. Consider it done. And Becca, I'm so proud of you. Not just for getting through this, but for how you've handled it. You're going to be more than okay. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. I would be more than okay. This chapter was ending, but the story continued. My story, on my terms, funded by Uncle Richard's generous gift, but shaped by my own choices. James had left me for his pregnant secretary, calculating that he could still control my inheritance. In just a few days, he would learn with absolute finality how wrong he had been. The trust fund he had schemed to access would remain forever, beyond his reach, protected by Uncle Richard's foresight and my own awakening. And while James's future contracted under the weight of his choices, mine was expanding in directions I had yet to fully imagine. The settlement wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, a doorway opening to possibilities I was only starting to glimpse. Tuesday couldn't come soon enough. Tuesday morning arrived with a crystalline clarity that seemed fitting for such a pivotal day. I woke before my alarm, feeling strangely calm as sunlight filtered through the blinds of my Belltown apartment. Today marked the official end of my marriage to James, and the beginning of whatever came next. I dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored navy suit that made me feel both professional and powerful. As I applied my makeup, I studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had changed in subtle but significant ways over these past weeks. There was a steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. A quiet confidence that came from facing betrayal and emerging stronger. Teresa had suggested I didn't need to attend the hearing in person. Our settlement agreement was uncontested, and my presence was technically optional. But I wanted to be there, not out of any desire to see James or create drama, but because this moment represented a threshold I needed to cross consciously, with full awareness of its significance. Olivia arrived at 9:15 to drive me to the courthouse, insisting on moral support despite my assurances that I was fine. I know you're fine, she said as we navigated downtown traffic. But some moments shouldn't be faced alone, even when you're strong enough to handle them. The King County Courthouse loomed ahead, its imposing stone facade a reminder of the weight of legal proceedings. As we approached the entrance, I spotted Teresa waiting on the steps, elegant in a charcoal pantsuit, her expression brightening when she saw us. Perfect timing, she said, checking her watch. We're in courtroom 3B. James and his attorney arrived about 10 minutes ago. My stomach tightened slightly at the mention of James, but I nodded calmly. Let's do this. The courtroom was less dramatic than those depicted in television shows, No soaring ceilings or ornate woodwork, just practical furnishings and fluorescent lighting. A handful of people sat scattered throughout, waiting for their own cases to be called. I spotted James and Bradford Collins sitting near the front, their backs to the entrance. Teresa guided us to seats on the opposite side of the room. I kept my eyes forward, avoiding direct sight of James, though I could feel the moment he became aware of my presence, a slight stiffening in his posture visible even from behind. Docket number 2025-3872, Peterson vs. Peterson, the clerk announced. After several minutes, dissolution of marriage, uncontested with settlement agreement. The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the paperwork with practiced efficiency. I see all required documents have been filed correctly, and both parties have signed the settlement. Agreement without duress or coercion. Is that correct, counselors? Teresa and Collins both confirmed this was the case. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, please approach. This was the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating. I rose smoothly, focusing on the judge rather than the man walking toward the bench beside me. In my peripheral vision, I could see James was wearing his best suit, the one he reserved for important client meetings, his hair perfectly styled, his posture rigidly formal. I've reviewed your settlement agreement in detail, the judge said, addressing us both with a neutral expression. Everything appears to be in order, but I'm obligated to confirm that you both understand and voluntarily accept these terms. Mrs. Peterson? I met her gaze steadily. Yes, Your Honor. I understand and accept the terms. Mr. Peterson? Yes. Your Honor? His voice sounded strained, lacking its usual confident resonance. The judge nodded, making a notation in her file. Given that all statutory requirements have been met and the agreement is equitable under the circumstances, I am approving this dissolution of marriage effective immediately. She signed the document with a practiced flourish. You are both free to go. Court is adjourned. The entire proceeding took less than 10 minutes, a stunningly brief conclusion to 6 years of marriage. As we turned to leave, James finally looked directly at me, his expression a complex mixture of anger, regret, and what might have been shame. For a moment, I thought he might try to speak to me despite the agreements not to communicate directly. His lips parted slightly, but whatever. Words he might have said remained unspoken. Instead, he gave a tight nod, an acknowledgement of defeat, perhaps, before Collins guided him toward the exit. Outside the courtroom, Teresa handed me a folder containing my copy of the final decree. Congratulations, Rebecca Mitchell, she said, using my restored maiden name with a smile. You are officially divorced and fully protected. Olivia squeezed my arm. How do you feel? I considered the question carefully. Lighter, I said finally. Like I've put down something heavy I didn't realize I was carrying. We walked out, into the spring sunshine, and I took a deep breath of fresh air. The legal battle was over. The trust was secure. The future, whatever it might hold, belonged to me alone. Ready for tonight? Olivia asked as we descended the courthouse steps. I smiled. Absolutely. Just need to make one stop first. That stop was the San Juan Islands property, Uncle Richard's cabin overlooking the sound that James had so rarely visited and yet had tried to claim in the divorce. I had asked Teresa to arrange for the locks to be changed the previous week, ensuring it remained my sanctuary regardless of the settlement outcome. The 2-hour drive north from Seattle followed by the ferry crossing gave me time to process the morning's events. By the time I reached the cabin, a beautiful cedar structure nestled among towering pines, I felt centered and calm. Inside, I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with a space that had meant so much to Uncle Richard. His presence seemed to linger here more tangibly than anywhere else. In the books lining the shelves, the comfortable furniture, arranged to maximize the spectacular view, the workshop where he had spent countless hours tinkering with inventions that sometimes became profitable innovations. In his study, I found what I was looking for: a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns, something he had shown me once years ago. Inside were photographs, letters, and mementos spanning decades, fragments of a life well lived. I selected a single item, a smooth stone Uncle Richard had always kept on his desk, claiming it helped him think clearly in difficult moments, and slipped it into my pocket. "I did it," I whispered to the empty room. "I protected what you built. I didn't let them take advantage." The cabin would need a thorough cleaning and some updates before I could properly enjoy it, but that would come later. Today it had served its purpose, connecting me to Uncle Richard's memory and reminding me of the foundation upon which I would build my new life. I returned to Seattle by early evening, just in time to prepare for the celebration Olivia had organized. She had reserved a private dining room at a small, elegant restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, intimate enough for meaningful conversation, but special enough to mark the occasion. When I arrived, I found a small gathering of people who had supported me through this ordeal. Olivia and her brother Michael, who had helped me move, Teresa and her wife Sandra, Marcus Daniels, my financial advisor, and to my surprise, Keith the Bee, private investigator who had uncovered the evidence that proved so crucial. "I hope you don't mind," Olivia said, noting my raised eyebrows at Keith's presence. "He was instrumental in your freedom, and I thought he deserved to be part of the celebration." "Not at all," I assured her. "I'm glad everyone is here." The evening unfolded with a warmth and genuine connection that felt healing after months of deception and strategic maneuvering. We shared a superb meal, excellent wine, and conversation that ranged from the serious to the playful. No one pressed me to discuss my feelings about the divorce or interrogated me about future plans. They simply celebrated the moment with me, offering their continued friendship and support. As dessert was being served, Teresa raised her glass. "To Rebecca," she said simply, "who taught us all something about dignity under pressure and the courage to start anew." Glasses clinked, and I felt a rush of gratitude for these people who had seen me at my most vulnerable and still believed in my strength. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Keith approached me quietly. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," he said, voice low, "but I thought you might want to know. James Peterson was placed on administrative leave by his firm yesterday, pending an ethics investigation. Word is they found evidence of other improprieties beyond his relationship with Clark." I absorbed this information with a strange lack of satisfaction. James's professional downfall seemed almost inevitable, the natural consequence of choices made long before I discovered his betrayal. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "But honestly, what happens to James isn't my concern anymore." Keith nodded approvingly. "That's the healthiest response I've heard from a client in 20 years of this work." As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Olivia hugged me tightly. "What now?" she asked. "World domination? Tropical vacation? New career?" I laughed. "Sleep, then coffee, then the rest of my life, one day at a time." That night, in my apartment overlooking the twinkling lights of Seattle, I sat on the balcony with a final glass of wine. The stone from Uncle Richard's desk rested in my palm, smooth and cool against my skin. 6 months ago, I had been a different person. Securely married, blissfully unaware of the deception surrounding me, grieving a beloved uncle but fundamentally unquestioning of my place in the world. Now everything had changed. I was divorced, wealthy beyond anything I had imagined, and standing at the beginning of a path I would define for myself. The journey had been painful, but the destination, this moment of clear-eyed independence, felt worth every difficult step. As spring turned to summer, I settled into a new rhythm. I returned to work, finding renewed purpose in my marketing role, though I now approached it differently. less desperate to prove myself, more selective about the projects I took on. The trust provided financial security that allowed me to make choices based on meaning rather than necessity. I began spending more time at the San Juan Islands cabin, gradually making it my own while preserving the elements that reminded me of Uncle Richard. Weekends found me hiking the island trails, kayaking along the shore, or simply sitting on the deck with a book, watching eagles soar overhead. The peace I found there was profound, a healing balm after months of strategic conflict. Occasionally, news of James reached me through mutual acquaintances or Seattle's surprisingly small professional community. The ethics investigation had indeed cost him his position at the firm. He had taken a much less prestigious role at a smaller company, a significant step down in both status and compensation. Vanessa had given birth to a baby boy in late summer. According to rumors, she and James were still together but living in a modest apartment in Renton rather than the luxury home they had planned to purchase with my inheritance. I found myself hoping, for the child's sake, that James would prove a better father than he had a husband. Life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. One rainy October afternoon, I received a call from Marcus Daniels, my financial advisor. "Rebecca," he began, an unusual excitement in his voice. "I've been approached by the board of Cloud Secure Solutions, your uncle's company. They're looking to expand their charitable foundation, and they're interested in having you join as director of philanthropic initiatives." I blinked in surprise. "Me? Why? I don't have any experience in that area." "They specifically mentioned your uncle's belief in your judgment and values. Apparently, he spoke of you often to the board members. They're creating this position with you in mind, leveraging the company's resources to support education and opportunity for underserved communities. It would be part-time initially, allowing you to maintain your current role if desired." The offer was unexpected but intriguing, a chance to extend Uncle Richard's legacy beyond the financial inheritance he had left me. After careful consideration and several meetings with the board, I accepted, beginning a new chapter that felt both challenging and deeply right. The foundation work brought me into contact with nonprofits, educational institutions, and community organizations throughout Seattle. I discovered a talent for connecting resources with needs, for seeing potential partnerships others missed. The skills I had honed in marketing translated surprisingly well to philanthropy, though the objectives and metrics were entirely different. By the following spring, almost exactly a year after my divorce was finalized, I had transitioned fully into my role at the Cloud Secure Foundation, leaving my marketing position with no regrets. My days were filled with meaningful work, my weekends split between the city and the islands, my social circle expanding to include people passionate about positive change. It was during this period that I received an unexpected message from a name I recognized immediately: Vanessa Clark. "I know this is strange, but I would like to meet. There are things I need to say to you in person. If you're willing, please suggest a time and place." My first instinct was to ignore the message or politely decline. What could possibly be gained from such a meeting? But curiosity, and perhaps a lingering need for closure, led me to respond. "Tomorrow, 1 p.m., Storyville Coffee on Pike. I can give you 30 minutes. She arrived exactly on time, looking both different from and similar to the woman I had seen in photographs and social media. Still beautiful, but with the slight exhaustion that comes with new motherhood evident in her eyes. She carried herself less confidently than I expected, hesitating at the cafe entrance before spotting me at a corner table. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting across from me with visible nervousness. "I wasn't sure you would agree." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly. "Why did you want to see me, Vanessa?" She took a deep breath. "To apologize. What James and I did to you was inexcusable. I've lived with the shame of it every day since..." The truth came out. I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but finding only genuine discomfort and regret. You participated in a plan to manipulate me and take my inheritance, I said calmly. Why should your apology matter to me now? She flinched slightly at my directness. It probably shouldn't. I don't expect forgiveness, but becoming a mother has forced me to think about the person I want my son to become, and the example I need to set. I can't change what I did, but I can acknowledge it was wrong and try to be better going forward. There was a rawness to her words that seemed authentic. I found myself softening slightly, not from forgiveness necessarily, but from recognition of another human being struggling to reconcile past mistakes with present reality. James told me you were cold, materialistic, uninterested in having children, she continued, looking down at her hands. He made it sound like your marriage was already over in all but name. I wanted to believe him because it made what we were doing seem less terrible. And now? I asked quietly. Now I know he lies to everyone, including me. Her voice cracked, slightly. He's not the man I thought I was building a future with, but we have Noah now, so I'm trying to make it work for his sake. I felt a surprising twinge of empathy for her, trapped in a relationship with a man whose true character she had discovered too late, her choices now constrained by responsibility for their child. Why are you really here, Vanessa? What do you want from me? She met my gaze directly for the first time. Nothing. That's the point. I wanted you to know that at least one person in this mess recognizes the wrong that was done to you and is genuinely sorry for their part in it. You deserved better. We talked for a few minutes more about her son, about the challenges of co-parenting with James, about her decision to leave his firm for a position at a nonprofit organization. As our conversation wound down, I found myself offering an unexpected piece of advice. Be careful with your finances, I said. Make sure you have your own accounts, your own safety net. James's relationship with money is complicated. She nodded, understanding the subtext. I've already taken steps in that direction. Thank you. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. Can I ask you something? How did you do it? How did you stay so composed, so strategic, when everything was falling apart? I considered the question, thinking back to those painful weeks of discovery and decision. I had people who believed in me, I said finally, and I refused to let someone else's betrayal define who I was or what I deserved. After she left, I remained at the table, processing the unexpected encounter. Meeting Vanessa hadn't provided the satisfaction of revenge or even the clarity of confrontation. Instead, it had offered something more valuable, confirmation that the cycle of deception James had created was breaking down. That truth had a way of emerging, no matter how carefully concealed. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and pink. The city looked different to me now than it had a year ago, not just a backdrop for my marriage and career, but a landscape of possibility, a place where I was creating a life entirely my own. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Dinner tomorrow? Got news about that art gallery partnership we discussed for the foundation. I smiled and replied, absolutely, my treat. 7 p.m. at Altura? As I set down my phone, I thought about the journey of the past year, from devastation to rebuilding, from betrayal to new beginnings. The inheritance that James had schemed so desperately to control had indeed changed my life, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. Uncle Richard's financial gift had provided security, but his real legacy was the wisdom that had prepared me to protect myself and the confidence to forge my own path. The trust fund James had coveted had remained firmly in my control, its resources now flowing not toward Madison Park luxury condos or status symbols, but toward initiatives that created opportunity for others. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected package at the foundation office. Inside was a sealed envelope and a small velvet box. The envelope contained a brief note in neat, precise handwriting. Rebecca. These belong to your grandmother, then your mother. Richard kept them after her passing, intending to give them to you on your wedding day. He asked me to hold them for the right moment if he couldn't be there himself. That moment is now, not because of any relationship, but because you have come into your own strength and purpose. He would be profoundly proud of the woman you've become and the choices you've made. With respect and admiration, Eleanor Whitman, Richard's former executive assistant. Inside the velvet box was a pair of sapphire earrings, elegant, timeless pieces that immediately brought tears to my eyes. I had vague memories of my mother, wearing them on special occasions, her dark hair swept up to showcase their brilliant blue stones. I put them on immediately, their weight against my ears a tangible connection to 3 generations of Mitchell women. Standing at my office window overlooking Elliott Bay, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but the closing of one circle and the beginning of another. James had left me for his pregnant secretary, calculating that he could still control my trust fund. He had been wrong on every count. The inheritance remained mine, protected by Uncle Richard's foresight and my own determined action. But more importantly, I had inherited something far more valuable than money: the resilience to face betrayal without being destroyed by it, and the wisdom to build a life of purpose from the fragments of broken trust. As summer approached again, I made plans to spend more time at the San Juan Islands cabin. I had hired a contractor to add a small guest house, not for entertaining as James had always insisted we should, but as space for a writer's retreat program the foundation was launching. For women from disadvantaged backgrounds, the property that James had dismissed as isolated and impractical would become a place of creativity and renewal for others, just as it had been for me. There was a satisfying symmetry to this transformation, taking something he had tried, to claim and reshaping it into something he could never have imagined. On a clear June morning, I stood on the cabin's deck watching eagles circle above the sound, the sapphire earrings catching sunlight as a breeze moved my hair. In my hand was Uncle Richard's smooth thinking stone, a tangible reminder of the man whose protection extended beyond his lifetime. "Thank you," I whispered to the vast sky and sparkling water. "For everything." The inheritance that was meant to trap me had instead set me free, not just financially, but from the constraints of a relationship based on calculation rather than care. The trust fund James had schemed to control had remained firmly where it belonged, while I had gained something far more precious: the knowledge of my own worth beyond any dollar amount. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from the foundation. Another day of meaningful work awaited. I answered with a smile, ready for whatever came next. The future stretched before me, open with possibility, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had led me here. Even the painful parts, even the betrayals. They had shown me who I truly was, and that was the greatest inheritance of all. 2 years later, I stood in the gleaming lobby of Cloud Secure Solutions headquarters, watching as a group of young women received their technology scholarships. Each of them had overcome significant obstacles to pursue education in computer science or cybersecurity, fields still dominated by men. Their faces shone with a mixture of pride and determination that reminded me powerfully of my own journey, though in entirely different circumstances. "They're impressive," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Eleanor Whitman, Uncle Richard's former executive assistant who had become both mentor and friend since sending me my mother's sapphire earrings. "Aren't they?" I agreed, smiling as the youngest recipient, barely 18, accepted her certificate with trembling hands. "That's Maya. She taught herself coding while working night shifts at a convenience store to help support her family." Eleanor nodded approvingly. Richard would have loved this program, using technology to create pathways rather than barriers. That was always his vision. The scholarship initiative had been my first major project as director of the CloudSecure Foundation. Initially conceived as a modest program for 5 students annually, it had expanded to support 15 young women each year with full tuition, mentorship, and guaranteed internships. The board had been enthusiastic from the start, recognizing both the social impact and the potential for developing talent in an industry constantly seeking skilled professionals. After the ceremony concluded, I returned to my office. Once Uncle Richard's corner suite, now redesigned with warm colors and comfortable seating for the many community partners who cycled through daily. The view of Elliott Bay remained spectacular, a constant reminder of Seattle's beauty even on the grayest days. My assistant Zoe appeared in the doorway with a tablet in hand. "The numbers from last night's fundraiser just came in," she announced with a grin. "We exceeded the target by 32%. The emergency housing program is fully funded for the next 18 months. I felt a surge of satisfaction. That's fantastic news. Send personal thank you notes to our major donors, especially the new ones. And make sure the housing program director knows immediately. They've been waiting to expand their staff." As Zoe departed, I turned to my computer to review the day's schedule. A calendar notification caught my eye. San Juan property. Final inspection, 3 p.m. The guest house was complete, ready for the first group of writers who would arrive next week for the retreat program. I texted Olivia quickly. "Still joining for the inspection today? Ferry leaves at 1:15. Her response came seconds later. "Wouldn't miss it, bringing celebratory champagne." The renovation of Uncle Richard's cabin had evolved far beyond my initial vision. What began as a simple guest house had expanded to include a communal workspace flooded with natural light, private writing nooks scattered throughout the property, and accommodation for up to 6 residents at a time. The Women's Words Retreat would offer month-long residencies to emerging writers from marginalized backgrounds, providing space, time, and mentorship from established authors. Olivia had been instrumental in developing the program, leveraging her connections in Seattle's literary community to secure funding and participation from renowned writers. Our friendship had deepened through the collaboration, transforming from social connection to genuine partnership. I glanced at the framed photograph on my desk, Uncle Richard standing on the cabin's deck, arms crossed, grinning at the camera with the sound sparkling behind him. The property that had once been a personal sanctuary was becoming a creative haven for others, extending his legacy in ways I hoped would have made him proud. The ferry ride to the San Juan Islands that afternoon was peaceful, despite the early summer tourists. Olivia and I sat on the upper deck, enjoying rare sunshine and discussing the upcoming retreat. "Melissa Anderson confirmed she'll lead the fiction workshop," Olivia reported, scrolling through emails on her phone. "And that poet you admire, June Liu, is available for the second session in August." "Perfect," I replied, watching the islands emerge on the horizon. "Everything's coming together. Speaking of which," Olivia said, her tone shifting slightly, "did you see the announcement about James's firm?" I shook my head. Though I no longer actively avoided information about my ex-husband, I didn't seek it out either. "They're closing the Seattle office, relocating operations to Phoenix. Apparently, they never really recovered from the ethics scandal." The news landed with surprising neutrality, neither satisfaction nor distress, just acknowledgement of information that no longer affected my life. "Will he go with them, do you think?" Olivia shrugged. "No idea. Vanessa quit months ago. She's working for that educational nonprofit now. Seems to be doing well, actually." After our coffee shop meeting 2 years earlier, I had maintained minimal but cordial contact with Vanessa. Our paths occasionally crossed through foundation work, and I had watched from a distance as she rebuilt her career and focused on raising her son. James, however, remained firmly in the past, a character in a previous chapter I had no interest in revisiting. The cabin looked magnificent as we approached from the winding drive. The original cedar structure remained largely unchanged, but the new guest house nestled among the trees complemented it perfectly, modern but unobtrusive, with large windows reflecting the surrounding forest. The contractor, a local island resident named Daniel Hammond, greeted us at the entrance. "Right on time," he said with a smile. "Ready for the grand tour?" For the next hour, we explored every detail of the completed project. The thoughtfully designed bedrooms, the communal kitchen with its massive island for shared meals, the deck position to catch both sunrise and sunset. Everything had been built with attention to both aesthetics and practicality, creating a space that invited creativity while remaining fundamentally comfortable. "It's perfect," I told Daniel as we completed the tour. "Exactly what I envisioned, but somehow better." He looked pleased. "Means a lot coming from you. This property's special, deserves to be used for something meaningful." Later, as Olivia and I shared the promised champagne on the main cabin's deck, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey from heartbreak to purpose hadn't been linear or painless, but standing here, surrounded by beauty, engaged in meaningful work, connected to genuine friends, I couldn't regret any of it. "A toast," Olivia said, raising her glass, "to new beginnings built on solid foundations." We clinked glasses as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sound in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow would bring the practical business of preparing for the retreat participants, stocking the kitchen, arranging welcome packages, finalizing schedules. But tonight was for appreciation of the journey, the destination, and the unexpected gifts that had emerged from apparent loss. The following week passed in a flurry of activity as the first cohort of writers arrived at the retreat. 6 women, from diverse backgrounds, a retired teacher finally pursuing her novel, a young journalist documenting immigrant experiences, a domestic violence survivor transforming trauma into poetry, and 3 others with equally compelling stories, settled into the space with visible excitement and gratitude. I stayed through the orientation, helping everyone find their rhythm and answering questions about the property and program. By the 3rd day, a palpable creative energy had taken hold. The sound of keyboards tapping in the communal workspace, quiet conversations over morning coffee, occasional bursts of laughter during evening discussions. On my final night before returning to Seattle, I invited the group to dinner in the main cabin. We gathered around the large dining table, sharing food and stories as darkness fell outside. The conversation flowed easily. These women, strangers, days earlier, already forming connections that might last well beyond their month together. "May I ask something personal?" Erica, the former teacher, ventured during a lull in conversation. "What made you create this retreat? It's so specific, so thoughtfully designed. It feels like there must be a story behind it." I considered how to respond, conscious of maintaining appropriate boundaries while honoring their curiosity. "My uncle built this cabin as a place to think clearly, to connect with what mattered most to him," I began. "After he died, I inherited it during a difficult time in my life. This property became a sanctuary for me, a place to rebuild and reimagine possibilities. It seemed right to extend that opportunity to others who might need similar space." The simplified version omitted the particulars of betrayal and deception, focusing instead on the transformative potential of having room to breathe and create. Based on the nodding heads around the table, the essence resonated regardless of details. "Well, we're grateful," said Marisa, the young journalist. "Spaces like this don't exist for people like us without programs like yours. You're changing lives here." Her words stayed with me during the ferry ride back to Seattle the next morning. The idea that pain could be transformed into purpose wasn't new. Countless philosophers and self-help books had explored the concept, but experiencing it firsthand had a profound impact that no theoretical understanding could match. Back in the city, life continued its steady rhythm. The foundation work expanded, connecting me with a network of passionate individuals dedicated to positive change. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, but enjoyable connections that reminded me intimacy was still possible after betrayal. My friendship circle widened to include people from diverse backgrounds and experiences, enriching my perspective in ways I hadn't anticipated. On a crisp October morning nearly 3 years after my divorce, I received an unexpected email from Teresa Wong, my former attorney who had since become a periodic lunch companion. Rebecca. Something crossed my desk that you should know about. James Peterson filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Chapter 7. Total liquidation of assets. His firm's relocation left him unemployed, and apparently he's accumulated significant debt. This doesn't affect you directly. The divorce settlement is long finalized, and the trust remains completely protected. I simply thought you should be aware in case it somehow becomes relevant to your foundation work or personal security. Would love to catch up properly soon. Coffee next week? Teresa. I read the message twice, searching for my emotional response. There was no satisfaction in James's downfall, no vindictive pleasure in knowing the man who had plotted to control. My inheritance was now financially ruined. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of detachment and vague sadness for the waste of potential. His professional skills, charisma, and intelligence now undermined by the same character flaws that had destroyed our marriage. I replied to Teresa, thanking her for the information and confirming our coffee date. Then I returned to reviewing applications for the Foundation's next round of technology scholarships, focusing on the future rather than the past. That evening, I took a long walk along the waterfront, processing the news about James. October. Had brought typical Seattle weather, a fine mist that wasn't quite rain but left everything glistening under streetlights. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, its distinctive silhouette a constant in a city constantly reinventing itself. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Rebecca, it's Vanessa. Could we meet briefly? Something important. To discuss regarding Noah's education. It relates to potential foundation opportunities. I hesitated briefly. Our previous encounters had been professional and straightforward, but direct communication remained infrequent. Curiosity won out, and I responded, Thursday lunch, Pike Place Atrium, noon? Her reply came immediately. Perfect. Thank you. Thursday brought clearing skies and unusual warmth for late October. I arrived at the Pike Place Market Atrium, early, securing a table near the windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Vanessa appeared precisely at noon, professionally dressed in a simple blazer and pants, her dark hair shorter than I remembered. Thank you for meeting me, she said, setting down a small portfolio before taking a seat. I appreciate your willingness, given our history. That history is increasingly distant, I replied evenly. What can I help with regarding Noah's education? She opened the portfolio, revealing information about a STEM education program for preschoolers. Noah is showing remarkable aptitude for patterns and problem solving, even at 3. His preschool teacher suggested this program, but it's highly selective and expensive. I wondered if Cloud Secure Foundation might have any scholarship opportunities or connections. I reviewed the materials with genuine interest. We don't currently fund preschool programs, but we're considering expanding into early childhood education next year. I'd be happy to pass this along to our education director for consideration in our planning. Vanessa nodded gratefully. That would be incredibly helpful. Even being on your radar for future opportunities would mean a lot. As we ordered lunch, I noticed her wedding ring was gone. She caught my glance and smiled wryly. James and I separated 6 months ago. The divorce was finalized last week. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Whatever my history with James, Noah deserved family stability. Don't be. It was inevitable, she replied with surprising candor. He never changed, always looking for shortcuts, always blaming others for his setbacks. When the firm relocated without him, he became increasingly bitter, drinking too much, taking financial risks that made no sense. Her directness took me aback. That must be difficult, especially with Noah. It's actually better now, she said. Noah and I have our own apartment, a predictable routine. I'm building a career I'm proud of at the education nonprofit. It's not luxurious, but it's honest. Our conversation shifted to safer topics: the education program, Noah's development, Vanessa's work. As we finished lunch, she hesitated before speaking again. You know about the bankruptcy, I assume. I nodded. My former attorney mentioned it. He tried to access your trust again, she said quietly. About a year ago. He was convinced there must be some legal loophole, some way to claim a portion despite the divorce settlement. He paid a disreputable attorney a significant retainer to pursue it. The revelation was simultaneously shocking and utterly predictable. Obviously unsuccessful, I observed. Completely. The attorney eventually told him it was impossible and refused to refund the retainer. That's partly what precipitated our separation. He'd taken money we needed for rent to pay for this futile attempt. I absorbed this information silently, marveling at James's persistent inability to accept reality. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Vanessa met my gaze directly. Because you deserved to know how right you were to protect yourself. And because I want you to understand that Noah and I are completely separate from James's obsessions and resentments. My request about the education program is genuine, not some elaborate scheme. I never thought otherwise, I assured her. Noah's opportunities shouldn't be limited by adult complications. As we parted outside the market, Vanessa offered her hand. Thank you for your graciousness. It's not something I took for granted. I shook her hand firmly. We've all moved forward, Vanessa. That's what matters now. Walking back to my office, through the bustling market, I reflected on how profoundly time changes perspective. 3 years earlier, I had been devastated by betrayal, consumed with protecting myself from those who sought to exploit my inheritance. Now that same inheritance was funding opportunities for others, while the people who had coveted it were scattered and diminished by their own choices. The following spring brought an unexpected invitation. Cloud Secure Solutions was being honored at a national technology conference for innovation in educational access. As director of the foundation, responsible for many of these initiatives, I was asked to accept the award and deliver brief remarks at the ceremony in San Francisco. Standing at the podium before an audience of industry leaders, I felt a moment of clarity about the journey that had brought me here. This recognition belongs to the visionaries who understand that technology's greatest purpose is expanding human potential, I began. My uncle, Richard Mitchell, founded Cloud Secure with that belief at its core. That security meant not just protecting information, but ensuring it remained accessible to those who could use it to transform their lives. As applause filled the ballroom, I caught sight of a familiar figure near the back. Walter Peterson, James's father, still imposing in an expensive suit despite his advanced age. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room, his expression unreadable, before he turned away. I continued my speech without pause, refusing to let echoes from the past disrupt this moment of professional accomplishment. Later, during the reception, Walter approached me directly, the first time we had spoken since before my divorce. Congratulations on the award, he said stiffly. Richard would be pleased with what you've accomplished. The mention of uncle. Richard's name in his mouth felt jarring, a presumption of familiarity he had never earned. Still, I maintained professional composure. Thank you. The Foundation's work honors his vision. Walter nodded, seemingly searching for words. James made significant mistakes, he finally said. With you, with his career. I may have contributed to his sense of entitlement. The closest thing to an apology I would likely ever receive from this proud man. I acknowledged it with a slight nod. The trust fund was never about the money itself, I said quietly. It was about respecting my uncle's wishes and protecting myself from manipulation. Your son's greatest mistake wasn't wanting wealth. It was believing he deserved to control what wasn't his. Walter's expression tightened, but he offered no argument. After an awkward moment, he simply said, "Good evening, Ms. Mitchell," and walked away. The brief encounter left me oddly serene. The past had lost its power to wound me. Even direct confrontation with one of its principal actors evoked nothing stronger than mild contemplation. The person I had become was shaped by that history, but no longer defined by it. That night in my hotel room, I pulled out Uncle Richard's smooth thinking stone. Still a talisman I carried for important moments. The surface had developed a subtle polish from years of handling, its weight familiar and comforting in my palm. "We did good, Uncle Richard," I whispered to the empty room. "We protected what mattered and built something meaningful from it." The morning brought final conference sessions and networking opportunities before my flight back to Seattle. As I navigated the crowded event space, accepting congratulations and discussing potential collaborations, I spotted a young woman intently focused on her laptop in a quiet corner, perhaps 20, with determined eyes and the focused concentration of someone seizing an opportunity. She reminded me powerfully of our scholarship recipients, the next generation of women in technology, claiming space in a field still working to become truly inclusive. In her absorption, I glimpsed the future Uncle Richard had envisioned and the legacy his trust had empowered me to build. My phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. Writers' Retreat applications for summer session closed yesterday. 126 submissions for 6 spots. Selection committee meets next week. Still want to participate? I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. Block my calendar for the full review session." Another cycle beginning, another opportunity to extend the ripples outward. The trust fund that James had schemed so desperately to control was fulfilling purposes he could never have imagined, creating pathways for others rather than financing luxury properties or status symbols. As my plane lifted off from San Francisco that afternoon, I watched the city recede below, thinking about the strange, winding path that had brought me here. The betrayal that had seemed devastating had ultimately freed me to discover my own capacity for resilience and creation. The inheritance that had attracted manipulation had become a tool for meaningful impact rather than personal indulgence. James had left me for his pregnant secretary, calculating that he could still control my trust fund. His plan had failed spectacularly, unraveling into bankruptcy and isolation while I had built something lasting and purposeful. Not because I was intrinsically better or more deserving, but because I had chosen to value connection over control, growth over acquisition, impact over status. Uncle Richard's final gift hadn't been the money itself, but the opportunity to discover who I truly was, beyond the roles of wife, niece, marketing executive. The woman who emerged from that painful chrysalis was stronger, clearer, and more purposeful than I could have imagined. As Seattle appeared on the horizon, I felt the familiar surge of homecoming, not to a place or position, but to the person I had become. The trust fund James had coveted remained secure, but its true value lay in what it enabled rather than what it purchased. That was the inheritance worth protecting, the freedom to choose my own path and extend that possibility to others. The pilot announced our final descent. I put away my laptop and gazed out at the approaching cityscape, ready for whatever came next. The story that had begun with betrayal had transformed into something entirely different, not a tale of victimhood or even revenge, but of reclamation and renewal. My story, on my terms, continuing to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. And that was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.